Good afternoon, Georgia. Today I must watch out what I say because I've got two ladies with me. My boss lady, Leigh Shenker, my partner in crime, and our special guest is Jessica Prinsloo. Now, I made a mistake when I advertised this. I said she was a practitioner, but she's still a student. Jessica, can you tell us about yourself so we can get to know you a bit?
Sure. Well, that's a very broad question. Oh my gosh. Where would you like to start? I was born in
No, that's
1985,
okay. Okay, that's okay. That's okay.
day
That's okay.
one. No. So highlights.
Yes.
So I became a qualified animal behaviorist in 2016. In a couple of years before that, my cat was hit by a car, and she went to the vet in for about a week, and my other cat was home and pined for her the entire week. When she got back from the vet, it was as if my cat that was there had amnesia, and I didn't know what was going on. And I happened to meet this wonderful, knowledgeable person called Lee Pinker a couple of weeks before that. And so, in an absolute panic, I called Lee and I was like, "What on earth is going on? My cat has amnesia." And just as fate would have it, Lee needed to do a case study, and her one person had fallen through, and she was like, "Oh my gosh, please be a case study." So through that, I learned that I knew nothing about animals. I thought that I did, and I absolutely knew nothing. And I was like, well, I need to know more about this. So then I started learning all about cats and dogs, did the Cope diploma, and yeah, I haven't looked back since. Since then, though, I also had a couple of kids. And then my youngest son had some neurological issues. And I realized that there's like a limit to what sort of what we study in terms of emotion. There's a cap on that, so I felt like I needed to get more information, especially in terms of parenting and child development. And that led me into now getting a psychology degree. So I'm almost finished with that. I'm in my last term for my undergrad, and hoping to do honors for the end goal of becoming a registered counselor.
Sure, that's a lot. Now, I'm going to put you on the spot. Which do you prefer, human brains or animal brains?
Well, I mean, there's so many similarities. And I think the beauty of what we study is that there is, um, it's because we study Panksepp and the core affect states and the emotions, the scientific basis of emotions. You can use that as a very strong foundational structure from which you can relate all sort of more higher cognitive processes that humans have that animals don't necessarily have, or that we have no proof that they have. Um, and so it creates a really good foundation to understand both. So I'm equally interested in both. I think that there is, in any interest, there's so much to learn. There's so many avenues that you can go through. At this point, I'm very interested in more of the sort of cultural side and the beliefs, and the uh, how people kind of function into like in spirituality and all of that, and what makes a person whole. I was more focused on sort of the neurology side and all of that, and I think that my interest has shifted. But who knows where it'll shift again in 10 years? I will infinitely be curious. So I don't think I have a favorite. I think it's all interesting to me.
No, definitely. Okay, now Jessica, I'm going to ask you two questions today, and then you and Lee can go crazy. I know Lee's got a lot of questions. Um, so I said I'm going to learn today from you guys because I know nothing about people. So
You probably know a whole lot more than you think you know. Totally.
I'm not going to comment at the moment, but my question is, um, in the dog world, this is sort of a phenomena that I'm not familiar with, or I don't know how to interpret this. If you look at the world of medicine from the 70s, things evolved, new things got discovered, new medicines got developed, and one guy who found out something, people ran with that idea, and you get all this new medicine stuff. And the same with cars. Some mechanic developed something, it got put in the car, and they ran with that. Now all cars got that thing. It's evolving. It's actually evolving very quickly. We call it progress, I guess. But in the dog world, it's kind of the opposite. Many people don't want to believe there's new stuff were found out, or they don't believe this new theories and stuff. Why is people so hesitant to accept change in the dog world, but the rest of the world's moving on?
I'm not sure that I would agree that in specifically the dog world, people don't want to accept change. I think that if you look at any avenue, there is resistance. Remember, resistance is a normal part of like how the brain is built. So if you look at how, like from an evolutionary perspective, a brain is a very energy hungry organ, and so it's going to take the path of least resistance to conserve energy at any cost, right? So it wants to conserve energy, and so once it's found something that works, it's going to stick to it. Change is going against the grain. It takes a lot of energy, and it doesn't want to do that. So anytime you're trying to instill change, there's going to be, and you're fighting against a natural resistance. We're built to conserve energy, not to expend it. Expending energy comes from frustration. That's how we became more than single cell organisms, obviously. But so change is good in terms of progress, but it's not the natural state of um, of energy. Energy is like we want to. Everything wants to be conserved, right?
Mm.
So if you have a pattern, whether it's behavior or if it's cognition, that's going to take energy to change, and so it's not going to be the natural process. And I think you'll find that in any field. I mean, if you have a quick little look at YouTube, and any domain will have some conspiracy theorist somewhere saying something about a field that they believe in, especially when it comes to something that's really personal. And when it comes to dogs, I think it is really an emotional side of life. We love our pets. And so if you think about, we feel we feel deeply about our animals. And whenever you feel something, there's going to be a lot of, worth there. And so, if you think about something like cognitive dissonance, right? Are you familiar with cognitive
Yeah.
dissonance? Okay, so for anyone who doesn't know, cognitive dissonance is a very uncomfortable state when you're trying to kind of resolve bits of information that don't necessarily fit. So let's say you believe that you love your dog, right? I'm assuming you love your dog,
Mm.
correct?
Yes.
And I'm assuming part of that belief is I will never hurt my dog,
Hmm.
correct?
Yes.
Those are feelings that are like they run really deep. Those are beliefs that run really deep. Now I come to you as a trainer and I tell you, what you're doing is hurting your dog. I've now presented you with information that is contradictory to two very core foundational beliefs that you have. I love my dog and I will never hurt my dog. So if I come to you and I say, here's scientific proof that you're hurting your dog, your brain is going to do everything in its power to remove cognitive dissonance, to remove that state. And to resolve that state, you're going to hold on to the bits of information that suit you best. And it's what suits you best is not to break away from the ideas you already have and go, "Oh, crap, maybe I was hurting my dog." You're going to go, I would never, because but I know that I love my dog, because that is a real feeling. It's an emotional feeling. It's a belief. And so like losing that is going to be very, very difficult. You can't just change your mind about that. So I can bring you any book or any bit of scientific evidence, and that's going to hold nothing when it comes to your feelings and your beliefs around how you are with your dog, right? The other thing is something called the stages of change. And often as trainers, we think about someone who comes to us and says, well, I need help with my dog. and you go, okay, cool, they must be in the action phase, because they're obviously asking me to change, like they want to change, so they're in the action phase. But actually, emotionally, they're still in the contemplation phase. And so we're coming and trying to meet them at the action phase, and they're not there yet. And so we get confused. Why are they not changing? But they're not changing because they're not ready.
Okay.
And so we have to be like aware of where people are at. They might say they're ready, but emotionally they're not necessarily ready. They also might just not have the capacity at that time. I have the knowledge to train my dogs and my cats and my chickens and my everything. I also have 4 children and I study full time. And so I don't train my dog. Because I don't have capacity. I'd love to. I'd love to figure out all the things that he could possibly do and do tests on his cognition. That would be super interesting. But I don't have time because I have other responsibilities. So it's not that I don't want to change my behavior. I probably do. But do I have capacity for it? 100% not. That's just like off the top of my head, a couple of reasons why people might be resistant to change. So I think it's really just important to meet someone where they're at and plant seeds. If we want change, planting seeds is the best way to go about it. It's definitely not to be forceful, because the more force you put in, the more that state of cognitive dissonance is going to be rejected, and they're going to get sit very fast in their current belief systems.
Okay. That's interesting. Now, my second question is actually, yeah, it will connect with this one. I used to be in the corporate business, so that's used to be a cutthroat thing. A lot of backstabbing going on. I can say that now because I'm not there anymore. But it's a lot of backstabbing going on and fighting and because everybody wants to climb the ladder, so they will do whatever it takes to do that. Then I left the corporate world and landed in the dog world. Now, before I left, I was sort of halfway in the dog world, but not fully, if that makes sense. But now, since I'm fully in the dog world, um, I find it hard to understand, and I'm going to call it colleagues in the dog world, because when I look at stuff, there's always fighting going on, there's always backstabbing going on, there's always bad mouthing going on, and I was always thinking it's the positive guys against the aversive guys against the balanced guys and that sort of thing. But lately I found that's not even true. It's more like it's the educated guys against the people not willing to get educated, that sort of thing. But even then, I found that's also not true, because the positive guys are even fighting with each other now, and it's so much so that it's actually causing people to want to leave the industry. And recently, I actually talked to somebody who was thinking of committing suicide because of this bullying going on. What on earth? Okay, if you get explanation for what's going on there, I have no idea. Honest.
So your question is, why is there so much conflict within the world of dog
Yes,
training?
yes.
We're going to need a longer podcast.
I was not hoping that one.
So, I mean, conflict. Okay, so there's so many things, and like from a psychological perspective, I'd want to tease this out for days. But one of the first things is we have to look at the paradigm that we're coming into this from, right? So there was actually a brilliant quote. I've got it somewhere because I loved it so much. It's on a post-it. No, yeah. Our views and feelings are the result of the paradigm into which we have been socialized. Okay? So everything that you know and that you think you know is a result of the paradigm through which you've been socialized. So that includes your culture, your race, your gender, all of your intersectionality exists through a paradigm. And a big part of the Western paradigm is a very zero-sum game way of having relationships. If you look at this through Adlerian psychology. His modality is called individual psychology, and he spoke a lot about superiority. That when we're born, we all have a need to become more superior. So, like when
Mm,
you're an infant, you're nothing. You're inferior to everything.
mm,
So your entire goal in life is to become more superior, which makes sense. And that's an objective statement. It's not like a it's not a bad thing to be superior or a good thing. It's just we want to be more superior than
mm.
we once were as a little tiny infant. And in a paradigm of a zero-sum game, somebody has to lose in order for me to win, right?
Okay.
So if I want to become more superior, I need to climb the ladder and I have to be above you. So that's a vertical relationship. And so our entire paradigm becomes framed through this structure of I need to win, and if I need to win, then somebody else has to be worse than me, right?
Okay.
If you look at what Adler wanted for society, was horizontal relationships where it's a win-win. So in order for us to become superior, your win is also my win, and my win is also your win, because we're in this together and we can fight for a common cause. And that sounds super simple, but when your entire conditioning as a child has been win, get the best marks. It's been based on, and I hate to say this, I'm going to get a lot of flack for this, positive reinforcement,
Mm,
external validation. So we all know that positive reinforcement with dog training works. You give the dog a treat, great. They're motivated to do it. But often when you don't have the treat, they don't do it because you haven't actually conditioned them properly to a cue. And so that's how a lot of it works as well in our paradigm, in the human world, is you'll be rewarded for good behavior, you'll be punished for bad behavior. If you're better, you get you get rewards at school, and there's always a competition. And so we're conditioned to be in competition with each other. We also have been taught that conflict is bad. When you fight with your siblings, you go, if you can't be good, then go away.
mm.
If you can't agree about that toy, I'm taking the toy away. We're conditioned that fighting and conflict is a bad thing. Conflict is an amazing thing. Conflict is where all the magic happens. We've just never been taught. And I say we as in like a very big generalization, but like I know very few people who have learned conflict resolution as a child from my generation and up. So it's just not the thing that we're ever given skills to do, as to how to manage respectful conflict. And when there's, like, I'm sure you've heard, when you're at a dinner party or if you're on a WhatsApp group, never talk about politics or religion.
Mm.
So we're never allowed to have conversations where we might disagree with each other. And all that does is turns us into a society where we can't have conversations about difficult topics. What we should be doing is being taught, this sounds like such a soapbox now, but why not? We should be being taught how to have conversations and how to respectfully disagree with each other when we have differing opinions. And even in, so like you were saying, even people who are in the scientific field and they, were educated and whatnot, it's good to have conflict in the scientific field. If you don't, then you'll never make any progress. Because if I constantly believe that what my thing is fact, I'm a really bad scientist. That's bad science. Science is not a destination, science is a process.
Oh, yeah.
And part of that process is suspending your ego and making the priority the game. So, what do I want to learn? How do I want to benefit this dog? What do I want to know about cats' brains? And it's not, and there is obviously politics in science, because you want to get your paper published, there's people who are giving you funding, and so there's a lot riding on it. So I don't discount that there's a lot more to it than just going, I need to be all brilliantly ethical and do everything by the book. There's lots of different pressures coming from different sides, but ultimately that's why there are checks and balances in science. That's why you have to have things like reliability and validity and robustness of studies, because that's where you get to the fundamental truth. So it's not that we should be avoiding the conflict. We should be embracing the conflict in a healthy way. And because we haven't been trained to do that, that's where everything goes.
Yeah, it explodes. That's really interesting. It's something I never thought of. Thank you for that. That's cool. Now, Leigh, it's all yours.
Oh, really, I could talk to you for ages. She's a really good friend of mine, and we yak on way too much often. So shut me up if it becomes too much. Um, so for me, what I wanted to talk to you about, because you're currently a student and because you're so involved in the science now of psychology, that is what I wanted to pick up on. And you've already spoken about it a little bit just now. How important is, when whenever there's this argument online, and I mean, as I've said before, I avoid online for this reason. But whenever there's an argument online, everyone that has got a degree or a qualification or something yells at the person who doesn't. You know, you need to use science-based information. It's so important to use science-based information. So what I wanted to ask you is, why is it so important to use science-based information? Why is that such a tremendous criteria in the work we do compared to those that don't? There's that whole argument all the time. So I just wanted to get into that a little bit, since you're directly in the middle of it at the moment.
Well, I mean, the first thing is because we are, again, our brains are designed to make patterns out of things, right? So we're going to think that things are true when they're not necessarily true. We are influenced by so much stuff that we're not even aware that we're influenced by.
Totally.
And so the scientific process is a way to counteract our infallibility. It's a way to make sure that what we think we're seeing is actually what we see. And so, I mean, I've done statistics, and I'd love to be able to be eloquent enough to explain it in statistical terms. But essentially, there are so many things in statistics where you can look at the analysis and you go like, well, at face value, this makes perfect sense and this should be true. But then you do a statistical analysis on it, and you do all of the fancy things, and you do a t-test and you check for significance, and there is no significant result. So you're like, this makes this like it should be right, but it's not, because you haven't reached a significant outcome. And if you haven't reached a significant outcome, then it means that there isn't validity to your argument. And that can be like really damaging because there are so much stuff that that should work. It seems like it should work. And even things like I mean, I think, how do I put this? Because I wanted to make sense. In psychological testing, right? There's one of my favorite tests, and for the life of me, I can't remember what it's called. But they wanted to test the maybe you'll remember, Leigh, because I'm pretty sure we've spoken about this at some point in our history. They want to test social influence and how much we might agree with our like with the crowd.
Yeah.
And so they do a test. I'm probably going to remember the name as soon as we leave this.
Totally.
But they call in a bunch of people, and I'm going to draw it on a piece of on a little post-it here so that you can see what I'm talking about. And they tell these people that so like it's a deception study, and they tell them that what they're studying is a bunch is eye focus or whatever, something to do with perspective. So they give you a couple of lines, and they tell the applicants. So they'll have like 10 people in the room, and they'll say, this is the first line. And now let's say there's 10 people in the room. One of the people is the test subject, and the other 9 are actors, right? And so they'll say, okay, tell us which line of these 3 is equal to the first line. Is it number 1? Is it 2? Or number 3? So the first person goes, and they are an actor, and they say it's line number 1. And then the second person goes, and it's the real person, and they go number 2. I mean, not number 2, sorry, number 3. They say it's 3, because as you can see, number 3 is the correct length as that one. Then the next person goes, and they say, no, line number 1. The next person goes, and they say line number 2. The next person says line number 1. And most of them say that it's line number 1. And at first the person looks around, they're a bit confused, like, what's going on? Why are they saying it's the wrong line? The next time they do the trial, they'll do different lines, and they'll ask the person, in the front of the line, which one is correct, and they'll say line number 2. The next person will say line number 2. Next person says line number 2, and the subject who's being studied will not say that it's line number 3. They will also say it's line number 2. Across the board. The only time this is less effective is with autistic people, because they tend to care a little bit less about what people think than what the truth is, what they perceive as fact. And so, generally speaking, in the neurotypical population, you are more likely to agree with your to agree with people around you and to conform than you are to go with what you think is true, even if you know it, even if it's something simple like this. So if you've got something that's like a scientific theory that might be slightly complex, that might have some any kind of nuance to it, you have to be able to cut that down to its bare bones and prove it block by block in order for it to be valid and for it to have merit. And then you must go and retest, and it should be replicable so that other people can go and test, because otherwise we don't get to truth. Otherwise we're subject to this.
It was similar with the shock tests they did, where they had one person inflict a shock on someone else, and the people who were being shocked were test subjects.
That's Milgram, Milgram.
Yeah. Brilliant. It was brilliant. And peer pressure alone would cause people to shock people and inflict punishment and harm on people. Yeah.
Yes. So, and interestingly, so here's another thing about statistics and about that study in particular, right? So in that study, Milgram wanted to figure out how we will respond to authority and if we will take orders if someone's giving it to us. And so the idea is, and what came out of the study was that they didn't think that anybody would give the test subjects the full shock. But everyone did.
Yep.
Everyone did. But here's the kicker. When they went back and looked at the data that he'd actually collected, everyone was going, oh, okay, so we just respond to authority and we listen. But when they reinterpreted the data, when they looked at the words that were used, when they were asked, please do this, they did it. And when they were told, do this, they were less likely to do it, which is a different interpretation of the results, which says we aren't just conforming and listening to authority. In fact, when we get orders shouted at us, we're less likely to comply, which is the opposite of what the initial interpretation of that study was, which is exactly why science needs to be looked at again and again and again. And that's why it makes it so interesting and so cool.
Totally. And what's so interesting about that, when you think about it, if you have a whole lot of people telling you that a prong works or a shock collar works or whatever it is, it's going to amount to a very similar thing, where even though testing and has shown completely different results, because that mindset is there and that kind of peer pressure is there, it really does make a difference in people wanting to use these tools.
Yeah.
And feeling okay and making it okay in their heads to use those tools, it's that cognitive dissonance. I'm going to justify why this is a good thing. Because my brain needs to understand why it's a good thing, and I'm saving the dog's life.
Yeah, and also because it will work. So if you do use a shock collar, it does work in the moment. It does. And so if you want to walk your dog and you don't want them to be lunging at another dog and you want to walk calmly down the streets because everyone's moaning at you, there's a lot of pressure to get it right. And I've got reactive dogs. I know how awful it is to walk down the street and have your dog. It's physically taxing. It's embarrassing. It's horrible. So there's so much riding on it just working and like quick. We're also a society of like instant gratification. So we want it to work now. And to try and get a successful behavior modification of a leash reactive dog, it's really hard work. And like in this lifestyle that most of us lead in the busy days, we don't really have the time. So I also feel like we have to also understand where the person's coming from and be compassionate to what they need and why they need it, what their goals are. And sometimes it might be worth going, just don't walk your dog. You don't have to, because they think they do. They think they have to walk their dog because that's what the paradigm is. You must walk your dog because they need exercise. A tired dog is a good dog. And so then they walk the dog. They're miserable. Dog's miserable. But how do I fix this picture? I must shock it so that it fits in this mold, and then everything's better. And like, so I get that. I totally get that. It's reinforcing in every way. So
fallout that happens as a result of it isn't associated with the actual act. It's attributed to something totally different. So we know that there's a lot of fallout from using, punishing devices or punishment on an animal or a human for that matter. But we make it unrelated to what we're doing.
Yeah, because it's something I can do. That's tomorrow me's problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
So there's a big disconnect there that happens.
Yeah. And we like to, we see what we want to see. We see what we want to believe. And so, and I don't say that judgmentally. That's just what happens. We make patterns out of things in front of us, and we want things to be right. I mean, as a mom, we look at our kids and they can do no wrong by us, because we want. Okay. Wrong people for that conversation. We're very different parents. But you will love your child unconditionally. You absolutely love them, and you will defend them with all of your mama bear might. Like somebody else says, I'm allowed to criticize my child, no one else must. Because it's that instinctive need. Even I know that my child is being an absolute brat. Like, don't tell me that. Like, that's my child. I'll tell them that. It's that disconnect, There's so much that lies underneath that, and like the expectations, the social constructs, all of that stuff.
Which brings us back to our value system, because if you value obedience and a dog that is totally obedient more than emotional well-being, you're absolutely going to look at that and go, there are results from that. Whereas, like, I'm a person who wants to see a dog happy and lying in water when I'm training them, and having the most fun, and the emotional well-being is so important to me, but that's not as important for other people. So it comes back to that value system.
Also, it might not also necessarily not be important, but they've also attached that importance, the well-being, on the picture that they think it looks like. So the dog is happy when they're walking nicely, obediently next to me, because they love to please me, and because they're calm and shut down and freezing and shaking like a chihuahua, but they're so calm,
and that's what we want.
So it's just it's a picture that they think looks correct, and so it seems like a good idea at the time. But again, then you go back to the cognitive dissonance of I wouldn't ever hurt my dog, so this can't be true.
I know.
It makes perfect sense.
Hard to work with this.
It's hard. Even as a person, even as a person with the knowledge, doing the actual work is exhausting. I recently adopted a dog, and he's fantastic, as you know. I love him. He can do no.
I was waiting for the moment, George, where she would bring him into it, because she's obsessed with the dog. She wants everyone to have like a Pomeranian now.
I know.
Pomeranian lovers out there.
I don't know what I've done. But the first week that he was here, he ignored everything when he came in. So I've got cats and chickens and another dog and stuff and kids, and he ignored everything. He was fantastic. But then obviously cortisol goes back to normal, adrenaline wears off. He's now not on this complete buzzy high of taking in his entire surroundings. And then a cat moved. And so, and now I've got this dog that, he chased. And now I chased the one cat, and then he chased the other cat. And it was full blown, like, proper chase. I was like, I don't want to take him back, but I also have got assignments to do, and I've got foster kittens, and I don't have time to do this. So I used management as my behavior protocol, which was put him on a leash and have him with me 24/7. So do not allow him to chase a cat, because in my experience, prevention of predatory behavior is the only way to address predatory behavior. So you prevent, and then you gradually, systematically allow them to see the stimulus that they want to fixate on, and gradually teach them that when you see it, you just don't do anything, or you give them an alternative behavior. But I don't cue it, because I'm not always there to tell them when they see the cat, leave it. So I never cue a predatory behavior away. I always just go, the cat's there, look at me, or look away, or get bored of the cat. And for a week, I had this dog on a leash next to me when I worked. And if I didn't have him, then my husband had him. And if my husband didn't have him, then one of the kids had him. And he was constantly being managed. And the only reason I could do that was because I knew that it was the only way. And I thought, if I were to tell one of my clients to do this, I know for a fact it would be almost impossible because he looked miserable. I feel like I broke his poor little white cotton soul because he was so like, he's come to this new house and he just has to lie here and do nothing at all. And on one hand, it was like tragic, but on the other hand, he learned that whenever there's a cat going past, I have to lie here and be bored. And that was all the learning was. I didn't give him treats for seeing a cat during that week. I didn't do anything other than just prevent the behavior from happening. And so that seems super simple, but it took a lot out of me. It was hard work. And it doesn't sound like hard work because you just sit with a dog on a leash. But that management, just psychologically managing his behavior, preventing that behavior constantly, is so taxing. So I get it that people don't want to put the effort in. I'm lazy when it comes to behavior mod. I'm not an active trainer, so I get it. And it takes a little bit of time, but he doesn't chase cats now
Good.
because they're
And
bored.
that is the most brilliant segue into what I want to talk to you about next. Because we're talking about predation training, and I wanted to talk to you. I don't know if you're aware of the controversy that's happening in the animal world at the moment in terms of a study that was released.
What's his name? Clive.
Yeah, and predation training. So obviously there's a lot of controversy around that, and the methodology used in the study. I don't know if you've read the study. I mean, you get good science, and you get fair science, and you get bad science. And so I just wanted to touch on that and get a feel for you. How do you recognize bad science, and how do you? I mean, if you're a layman, you're going to look at that and go, "Oh wow, shock collars stop predatory behaviors. That's fantastic! Like now it's 100% justified. It's out there. It's published. It's written." So what do we need to be aware of?
Well, if you're a layman, you're not going to read the study.
True story.
If you're a layman, you have absolutely no interest in the study. If you're a layman, you're going to be watching someone reporting on the study on TikTok.
Yeah.
And I don't say that with any judgment. TikTok is a hell of a lot easier to digest than a study.
Totally.
So, and I mean, it's like if you look at all, like, so the study was done very poorly. Let's just like call a spade a spade. I did read a statement that Clive Wynne made, and I'm a big Clive Wynne fan. I think he's great.
He's done incredible work. I have a lot of empathy for him in this situation. I do.
And I do think, like, and he made a statement about how if anyone's going to do it, why doesn't he do it? Like, he's already done his thing in the because it's such a contentious issue. But he does think, there's a potential risk. So if, let's say, because ultimately I think our value ends up being the animal's welfare, right? And so I think Dunbar touched on this as well back in the day, where it was if your animal's welfare is they don't go out for a walk because they're so leash reactive. He made the argument, and I'm very much paraphrasing here because this was like a long, whole big drawn out thing that he did. But if you could shock the dog 3 times and that worked and it allowed them to go out and have a great life, then you know what? He thinks that's worth it. And I tend to agree with that if it worked. So just for argument's sake, if inflicting a small amount of pain and harm causes long-term benefit and gain, is it justified? Now that's where you need like ethics to come in. And that's where, unfortunately, in our field, we don't have proper ethics. Everybody thinks they're more ethical than they actually are. Everybody. Because everybody confuses ethics and morality.
Totally.
So morality is the difference between wrong and right. Ethics is abiding to a set of procedures or codes. And we don't have an ethical code in animal training. There isn't one. It doesn't exist. So there are bodies that create certain codes. But I mean, off the top of your mind, in fact, let's put you on the spot, George. How would you go about solving an ethical dilemma?
I only can comment on my own ethics. It's a difficult situation. I can only comment on what I believe, what my ethics are.
Exactly. So what you believe is based on morality, not on ethics.
Mm.
So you, at this point in time, don't have a set procedure on how to deal with an ethical dilemma. And a dilemma is something that doesn't really have a good outcome. An ethical dilemma is something where both options are actually pretty rotten. But we've got to go through a process of, like, identifying the problem, finding out what the issues are, looking at the codes, getting consultation, all these different steps in the process to decide what to do next in order for a decision to be made that might not be the best decision, but it's the best if you're following a certain set of steps. Now, we don't have those steps. No one teaches those steps to us. So it's just a minefield of everyone doing what they think is morally correct. And so you've got someone like Wynne and Dunbar going, you know what? I'm actually just going to suspend all the judgment for a second and go, maybe this works. Like I care about welfare, and maybe the what's the state of the thing? The means justify the end. The ends justify the means. Maybe that's right. And I think that was his intention that's what he set out to do. He just unfortunately did it really badly.
I don't think he even did it, to be honest. I think it was his student. If that's my feeling,
because it wasn't really involved, that would probably make a lot more sense.
Because it was co-authored by a student. It was him and someone else, and his PhD student. And my feeling is that he just took the eye off the ball a little bit, and let his student run with it. And that is my feeling that I get. But
that's a good.
I could be wrong.
That's a good conspiracy theory. I like it. I can get that. It makes a lot of sense. But yeah, ultimately, if someone is getting the information, you have to learn to be critical. And in this day and age, it's really difficult to be critical because information is presented in such a bright and shiny way. And everything that you ever see is 5 reasons why your dog does this, or 3 things never to do with your dog, or it's all these clickbait, social media, fast acting, dopamine, delicious ways of getting information through to you. And unfortunately, learning how to critically analyze whether something is factual or not is a skill that takes time. It's a skill that requires a lot of will. You need to want to know the truth, because people like it to come easy. I like it to come easy. I would much rather ChatGPT the answers to my essays. It's much easier. Makes it look so awesome. It'll give you all the false citations.
It appears to be so believable, right?
It's so believable.
It appears to be so legit.
It appears to be legit. It all looks pretty and shiny. But when you learn, and I think that's the thing that comes with deep learning that we tend to not get these days. Deep learning is when you really get stuck into a subject and you want to go further than just a 5-minute short on a nice shiny topic, and you want to really go into it. And I think it's also really important to know that every client we have doesn't necessarily want to become a behaviorist. So they don't necessarily want the nitty-gritty in the background. They don't care what the amygdala does. They don't care. They don't care about the neuroscience. In fact, I don't really care. I used to care a lot. It made me feel super smart, but actually it doesn't make me a better behaviorist. Knowing the neuroscience behind something at a higher level, like I think it's important to know like the difference between the limbic system and like higher cognitive processes, like bottom up, top down processes, right brain, left brain. I think that's important to know, like higher level stuff. But when you're getting into like and even maybe some neurotransmitters and how those interactions work, very important stress response. Need to have a good understanding of how the stress response works. But in terms of like how, like what receptor goes with what and where, okay, maybe like GABA receptors, because that's important with medication and things. But I mean, what pathway goes to what from the VTA to the corpus callosum to what? You're never going to think about that stuff at a behavior consult, and neither is your client. So like, that's not, in my world, that's not important. I think to make a good behaviorist, one of the best things you need to do is to work on communication skills. So find a way to communicate the science, good and bad, to a client in a way that makes sense to them. And that doesn't mean dumb it down. It means have it make sense to you in a way that is simplistic and systematic and based on a really good foundation of information done by good scientists and maybe not their PhD students. Although Coppinger had a really good PhD student, Catherine Lord. She was really good. She was very analytical.
Yeah.
But yeah, like just be discerning, learn to discern, like, and question, be a little bit cynical. Is this right? Am I doing it right? Have a little bit, like, suspend your ego for a bit, have a little bit of humility, be open to learn. Because if you, the moment you don't want to learn anything, you're not going to learn anything. So if you learn something that tells you that you're already right, great. That's just confirmation that you've been doing it well. And if you learn something that that contradicts how you've been doing something, then go, oh wow, okay, that's what I knew then, and have the humility to go, oh, okay, did it wrong. This is what I know now. I will grow from that. That's what growth is. And it's a hard part, because that's like, it's quite a vulnerable process. Nobody likes to think that they've done something wrong, or likes to think that they're hurting their dog, or that they're a bad person, or that their ethics aren't sound, or that they're morally unjust. But if you just kind of suspend your ego, but look at your values, look at what your end goal is. Is your end goal the emotional well-being of your dog? Is your end goal to be calm? Is your like, what is it that you're going for? Why do you want to, maybe your end goal is, I want to have a super obedient dog and I want to go into obedience. That's also fine. Then that's what your goal must be, but it has to be right for you. And like, then when the critics come, you can have a nice conflict that's respectable.
Oops.
I think that, sorry, George, I know you're going to wrap us up soon, but I think that it is our responsibility as professionals in the field, if we are going to be professionals in this field, and if I think about the decisions I am part of in my profession, euthanasia of a dog, couples splitting up because of a dog or a cat, that if I think of all the welfare, harm, emotional needs of a dog, if I think about all of those things, for me, it is so important that we as professionals do educate ourselves and do look at the sides and do go, we're not going to trust ChatGPT to come up with a behavior modification program for us, or reasons why we think our way of thinking is right.
A really good example of that. So I had to do an interview a little while ago on stress in pets. And also, just don't get me wrong, I love ChatGPT. It's really good for coming up with structure and ideas and things like that.
Absolutely.
And if you're stuck, use it. Like, I'm an AI fan. Like, AI is there to help us. It's not something that we need to depend on, but it's something that's there to help us. So I was running a bit of a blank, and I wanted some ideas, and I went and I was like, what can you do for a pet to help them be calm at home? And it came up with this whole list of things. And I was like, but that doesn't actually make sense if this is the dog's problem, or if that's the cat's problem. So again, it's like those, you can use it for ideas, get ideas from anywhere, but be discerning in
Absolutely
what you put out there. So you have to still go, okay, that might work, but that's not going to necessarily work for frustration, or that's not going to work for separation distress. So you need to, it goes back to the, it depends. But take all the help you can get, take in the information, just be discerning when it comes in. And so that when you give information to clients, or to, if you're going to put it on a social media platform, then at least you can go back and go, I had a foundation for this and it was XYZ. I'm not just.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And those that would argue experience is more important than knowledge or science?
I think experience is incredibly important. I think that there is only so much you can learn from a book, and until you put it into practice, it's almost meaningless. I think you need both. If you have only experience and no theory, then you are at the mercy of your own patterns and your own behavior, and your own belief systems and your own morals and your own ethics. And if you have only theory and no experience, then you won't necessarily know how to adapt to real world situations, because it looks like it's going to work out perfectly in the book. And I think this happened to me a lot, because when I came into this field, I wasn't a dog trainer. A lot of the people that I studied with were working as dog trainers, or they were grooming parlors, or the vets, or whatever they were, and they were working with animals. And I came from a background in media to just come and get the science. And so then when I started working, I had crazy imposter syndrome because I didn't know how to do it with my hands. And so it took a really long time to go, oh, that's how you actually do it. And this is how you apply the science. So 100% you need both. If you only have one, then go get the other.
Agreed.
Good advice. Now, unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. Our hour's up.
I have to do it again,
It's been an
George.
hour, a whole hour, 60 minutes gone. Unbelievable.
Doesn't feel like it. Yeah.
Definitely not. But Jessica, thank you so much for joining us. She really, I learned a lot. I'm quite honest. I don't know much about human psychology and what have you. I learn day by day and by experience as well. Leigh, thank you for joining us, and
Anytime.
Thank
we'll
you so
speak
much.
soon. Thanks a lot for watching.
Thanks, George. Thanks, Jess.
Thanks for having me. Bye,
Bye.
guys.
Yes.
Bye.